Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here. My name is McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore. I just want to say thank you guys for joining us. This is a wonderful way to start off the week. It's going to be a fun, heartbreaking, interesting, informative event, just like the book itself that we're talking about tonight. So I want to say thank you for supporting. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Sorry about that. My other screen was not muted. I apologize. Sometimes it happens. I'm a bookstore person, not necessarily a technological one. So I appreciate your patience. Thank you guys again, sincerely, for joining us. Like I said before, my name's McKaylee. I'm from Tattered Cover Bookstore. And Tattered Cover, for those of you who might know, as we've been having some people joining us from all over the country here, that Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado. We have 4 locations in the Denver metro area. And right now, if you are in that area, if you are in the state, you can drive down and come visit us at any of our 4 locations, which are open 7 days a week. As long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, you can come visit us and browse for about 90 minutes or so. But if you're like me and you want to shop in your pajamas, or you're just not ready to leave the house, or you're one of those awesome people from across the nation who's tuning in right now, you can always shop online with us at tatteredcover.com. We are so grateful for your support of supporting local businesses. It's a choice where you shop. We appreciate you choosing us. So thank you for doing that. And thank you also for being a part of our online community and being part of our virtual community. Tattered Cover is known for being a space in Colorado that is bringing people together and really being in touch with our community. But we can't do that right now. We can't be together in the same way. So we're doing it online. So thank you for being here. I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled for those who might need it. All you have to do to click that on is there's a black bar at the bottom of the screen that you're watching me on right now. There's a button labeled CC on it. And if you click on that, closed captioning is enabled if you want it or need it. I want to also quickly let you know about our upcoming events that we have. We have so many events this month. It's amazing. I'm so excited for them. And you're going to be seeing a lot of me if you come watch them, like Nate and Kaylee Klemp, whose new book, The 80/80 Marriage, comes out tomorrow. They're local authors from Boulder, Colorado. And for any of you nature freaks out there, we have Rick McIntyre with his second in his series, The Rise of Wolf 21, and that's on Wednesday, the 10th. So again, tatteredcover.com/events. But I want to talk about the event that we're having tonight. I am very personally invested in this book, and I think it's one that everybody needs to be reading, and it's an issue that's very important, and she does an excellent job at that. So I want to introduce you to Mayumi Grigsby. She's an attorney with a long history of advocating for policies that empower marginalized communities. Bilingual in French and English, she holds a bachelor's degree in French and government from Georgetown University and graduated from Northeastern University School of Law with a concentration in international law and human rights. She currently works in policy in the city of Chicago and sits on the board of Between Friends and Girl Forward. After she experienced dismissive treatment while seeking answers for a mysterious and ongoing health issue, Grigsby decided to expand her advocacy by addressing disparities in the U.S. healthcare system in her first book, EmpowHERed Health, Reforming a Dismissive Healthcare System, which is the book that we're talking about tonight. So it's my honor to welcome Umi here with us tonight. We're going to have her turn on her camera and her microphone. Here we go. And there we go. She's coming. There she is.
Hi.
Hi, Umi. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction.
Oh, thank you. You're the one with all the impressive credits. I just read it out loud. So thank you for that. I would love for you to start off telling us, what is EmpowHERed Health about?
So EmpowHERed Health is about health inequity with a focus on the experience of Black women when they're interacting with the healthcare system here in the United States. So it's not, there's a focus on Black women, but it's not only about Black women. I talk about allies, I talk about people in the LGBTQ community, and I also talk about immigrant women who aren't necessarily women of color, and I talk about their experiences oftentimes being dismissed when they're interacting with the healthcare system.
Yeah, and it's something that I hate to say that a majority of women can relate to, a majority of people can relate to. You have a bit of a reading to give us a taste of what this book is. Do you want to start that off for us?
Yes, so I am actually going to be reading from chapter 9 of Empowered Health. I hope you could see that. And the chapter is called Dear Brianna. Dear Brianna, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we live in a world that isn't designed to give you justice. I'm sorry that the laws that exist are created, enforced, and applied through a lens that often does not allow for justice for people who look like you. My uncle Stanley Dudley was my favorite uncle. Selfish reason that he always came bearing gifts. I always wanted him around because he was funny, kind, and made me feel safe. He wasn't like my father or other members of my family who worked in government, but he was still a hero in my eyes. And I remember lighting up every time he came around. Unfortunately, when my family was finding their way out of Liberia, rebels at a checkpoint stopped him. He was shot and killed because he was recognized as a police officer. When I think about Uncle Stanley, I can't picture him, mostly because we didn't think of taking family pictures when we left Liberia and we lost everything. I have no frame of reference to what he looked like, but I know whenever I think of him, I sob uncontrollably. I can only think of what he represented. He made me feel safe. I thought he was honorable. The fact that he took a job that was so dangerous that ultimately cost him his life made me respect the true value of public service. With every instance of police brutality, I think of my uncle. I think of my undying respect for him, and I feel my trust in the honor of public servants cracking. It is hard to write a book in 2020 without acknowledging what is happening around us. Believe me, I tried. But racism is a public health crisis, and any book addressing public health inequity must acknowledge this fact. On its face, the murder of George Floyd doesn't seem to have anything to do with Black women and Black women's health, but it does symbolize the devaluing of Black humanity, and that has a lot to do with Black women's health and the way Black women are treated in this country. As I think of George Floyd, I also think of Brianna Taylor. Brianna was a 26-year-old Black woman, an emergency room technician. In March of 2020, police officers in Louisville, Kentucky, while executing a search warrant, used a battering ram to enter her apartment. Shortly afterwards, she was shot 8 times by police officers. In September of 2020, a grand jury in Kentucky indicted one of the officers who had already been terminated prior to the indictment on 3 charges of first-degree wanton endangerment due to allegedly firing blindly into the apartment and endangering neighbors. The 2 other officers who shot at Brianna Taylor were not indicted because the Kentucky Attorney General deemed their shooting justified, says Brianna Taylor's boyfriend allegedly fired first. And so here we are. I never believed that the officers would be charged with anything based on my legal training and experience with similar cases, but it still hurts. The situation feels hopeless, and it does not feel like justice was served. I cannot help but think it could have been me. As a Black woman, I cannot stop myself from arriving at that conclusion. Specifically, when I see a Black woman killed and only 1 officer out of 3 charged for shooting the bullets that damaged the walls around her. It is wrong to equate the 2 stories of George Floyd and Brianna Taylor. Both lives were unjustifiably cut short. But it bears questioning why it took so long for Brianna Taylor's family to find something resembling justice. The World Health Authority defines social determinants of health as the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and age, and the wider set of forces and systems shaping the conditions of daily life. Police violence for Black communities in the United States is one of many social determinants of mental health. When I found out about George Floyd's death, I had just learned that another uncle of mine had died due to COVID-19. I immediately activated my autopilot mode. I finished my meeting, logged off, and tried to stay away from the computer and phones and the news. However, it is hard to log off in 2020. I can turn on my Netflix and pop open a bottle of wine and still hear the constant sirens and emergency alerts and the whirring of helicopters that make me feel like I am under siege. I find myself sobbing for the Black boys and men in my life, as well as the Black women who are also being killed and will wait longer for the level of anger required to receive some semblance of justice. The persistent trauma related to Black death is to endure. And while it is hard on me as a grown Black woman, it is even harder on Black girls. And maybe after this segue, you're still wondering what this has to do with Black women's health. Well, according to the CDC, Black women experience the highest rates of homicide of any racial group in the United States. So Black women begin exhibiting signs of trauma early on and are punished for it. And then a disproportionately high percentage become victims and lack trust in the system that punishes them. I keep thinking of this space Black women occupy in society, whether we're talking about police brutality, dismissive healthcare systems, domestic violence, homicide, or health in general, where we as Black women are at the same time in pain and or victims, mistreated and or dismissed by the systems designed to protect and treat us, and we're still expected to survive and thrive. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love how you tied it in together, you know, with what is happening in our world and what shook the United States and the world. Really, there were protests all over the world so heavily in June of 2020. So thank you for that. That was not easy to be able to write about, you know, and when you were trying to cover such a wide breadth of topics and being able to have that in there, good on you. It was good and well done. So thank you for tying that together. I have to ask though, how was it trying to write a book in 2020? Like, how'd you do it? Are you doing okay?
I know, right? I tell people that it became like my therapy because we couldn't go out and we're all inside. And then, you know, George Floyd's murder happened and there was civil unrest. And so you really couldn't go outside because, you know, of everything that was going on. And so I almost felt, and like I said, I felt under siege. Yeah. And in my neighborhood, I kept hearing helicopters, and the whirring of the helicopters really triggered me because, like I mentioned in the book, my family escaped Liberia at the onset of civil war. And so for me, it was just very triggering, that feeling of just constantly being under siege. And a part I didn't read because, you know, we only have a limited amount of time.
That's why you wrote a book.
Exactly. Is that I started to feel this creeping sense of agoraphobia. Like I did not want to leave my apartment because I just, you know, people weren't wearing masks. You know, you were hearing about people, you know, going into the jails and COVID in the jails. And it was just like, it just felt like so much was happening at the time, you know, with immigration issues. Yeah. And, you know, I am a US citizen, but, you know, I grew up as an immigrant when I moved here. And so I think for me, it just felt like everything was coming together and the safest place was my apartment and writing this book. So it ended up being the best time to write a book.
Well, you know what? And that's good for us too. We got this gift you've given us out of this book. I have to ask, given your background as a lawyer, what made you turn to writing a book? What sparked that fire that said, oh, I need to do this and this is how I'm going to do it?
You know, I have always wanted to be a writer. You know, I always wanted to, like, I always had this creative side of me. I was in theater, you know, in high school. I you know, was in plays in my senior year of college. And I feel like there was always this kind of creative side of me that I hadn't really had a chance to tap into, especially when I, you know, officially became an attorney. Yeah. You know, you can't really, there's not a lot of space in court to be creative or to like tap into that side of you. So I felt like the book was really an opportunity for me to, it was such a serious topic. It came from, you know, my personal experience being dismissed by the healthcare system. And I was kind of working through that. And so it was a way for me to tell those stories, but in a way that was creative nonfiction. I really wanted it to be a story, right? I really wanted to, that's why I told the story of, you know, my uncle, is I wanted to show the different layers to every story. Every story that I write in there is someone, you know, someone is entrusting you with their story. And even the story about what happened to me, I tried to infuse a lot of humor in it because it was so torturous. And so, and the only place you can do that really is when you're writing, because you have complete control over how you tell that story.
No, absolutely. You talked about being gifted and being trusted with other people's stories.
Yeah.
How did that process start? How did the interview process start? How did finding people's stories? I mean, I feel like I could, you know, toss a snowball and hit somebody who's been dismissed by the healthcare system. But what did that process look like for you?
So for me, it first started out with in 2018 when, and you know, when you read the book, and we've talked about this before.
Yes.
So in 2018, I had enough. I'd been going to doctors for years and basically saying that, you know, I was in pain, and they kept telling me that I was fine. And so I had it. I went home one day because I had been crawling around my apartment because I was in so much pain. And I looked up my symptoms and I looked up, you know, my demographic, and it was very clear what was wrong, right? And turned out that when I just diagnosed myself and called a professional, a specialist, she confirmed what I thought I had, which were fibroids. Fibroids happens in 70% of women. However, in Black women, they tend to be larger. They're more likely to be numerous, requiring surgery, and to turn malignant, right?
Right.
And so any doctor who had that kind of cultural competency or experience, working with Black women should have thought, let me do an ultrasound, let me see what's going on. But instead, the problem was allowed to continue. And to cut a very long story, or 331 page story short, I went from thinking I had 3 to thinking I had 22, to them finding out that I had 30 while I was in surgery. So yeah, so it required quite a bit of recovery. And during that recovery, I thought there's no way that this could only have happened to me. And I just, went on Facebook and said, I'm writing this book. I'm really excited about it. Would love to hear if anybody has a story that they would like to share with me. Immediately, people just started to DM me in my own circle. I have a story
Wow.
about, when I gave birth and I had 50 hours of labor, and they didn't believe me when I told them that, like, I was leaking amniotic fluid. I had another friend who was, yeah, when I was in labor, I told them that the epidural didn't take, and they didn't believe me, and advocated for myself. And so it wasn't even just those stories. Then other people started to reach out to other people. And so at first, where it was going to be, 4 or 5 stories about, Black women interacting with the healthcare system, it became about, 2 non-binary individuals, and who were not of color, but who also had experienced dismissive treatment, or another person who is a Latinx man, who's gay, and his interactions with the healthcare system that sometimes can be dismissive. And then, going forth and telling an immigrant story, which, does not reflect my own story, but is also an important part of the puzzle. And you start to kind of feel this, all the stories kind of took on a very specific pattern. I told my doctor this, everything was fine. It started to feel like my doctor thought I was crazy, or my doctor maybe said at some point that, I would think that you were crazy except for this, this, and this, which is really something that someone said to somebody in the book. And so it just sort of, this pattern of dismissiveness or not being believed emerged. And then, so I first wrote the stories and then thought to myself, if I just write these stories, people are just going to say, oh, it's anecdotal. Oh, it's that one person's experience. Oh, that person lives there. Like, who knows what else happened? So that's why I said I have to have data to back this up. And then, of course, you start to look into it, and there are all these stories of health inequity. There are all these, rates, especially in reproductive justice and breast cancer. And there are stories that I didn't get into because, then it would have been, Barack Obama's, part 1, and to really, really in 1,000 pages. So yes, it did involve a lot of conversations where I would talk to people, and then I would transcribe, and then I would try to find the narrative, write it, and then call them again and just say, okay, so did I get this right? Is this accurate? Let me know. And they would read it and they would say, oh, I didn't even think about it that way. I didn't even think about the data. I didn't even know about all of these things. I just knew that something happened to me that didn't feel right.
Wow, that's really cool how you were able to connect the personal stories and then the data, the heart and the head of it, And so how did you plot out the whole book? What did that planning process look like for you when trying to choose which stories to include, which data points to include? How did your structure process work?
So it was really organic. So first, one very important part of the story is that I was on LinkedIn, and a professor, who's a professor at my alma mater at Georgetown, reached out to me, and he was doing this, like, authors class, and he was like, I think everybody has a story inside of them, and so I want to, see, if you're interested. And so he had these kind of, like, outlines, or it was like, okay, you write a hook, and then sort of like, this is a storyline, and then this is the conclusion. But he's probably going to see this. I have to be very honest. I had this story in my head. I had my story, right? I had written my story down, and I knew that that was going to be the first story in the book. Like, I knew that that narrative, which started out with an early memory, and then it went into the narrative of what happened to me, sort of like the shocking hook. Little did I know this would happen, and then sort of went backwards and gave that sort of narrative, and then ended on the note of, I wanted everything to end on kind of a hopeful note. I didn't want it to be story after story of, like, you know bad news, which, to be honest, there's a lot of bad news there, and you need to tell those stories. But I also put stories in there of good news, right? Of people who had positive experiences. I put in stories, there were interviews with Black women who are physicians, and what their perspective is. And so the way it's organized is, it sort of took this kind of interesting narrative where I had my introduction, then I talked about my story, then it went into kind of more of the reproductive justice and the pregnancy stories, ending with kind of, this is how you advocate for yourself. And then I went into the next part, which was intersectional perspectives. And that's where I brought in people who were not, cis, heterosexual Black women. And then ended with, where do we go from here? Because I didn't want a book that was just like, I'm really sad, I'm really sad, I'm really sad. I kind of wanted a narrative that went into, all right, now that I know this is happening, what can I do? And kind of ending on that note of systemic change is required, but that takes a really long time, especially if tomorrow you have to go in and tell a doctor that you're in pain, or you have to tell a doctor that you need pain medication. And we know, based on the data, that Black people are less likely to be believed when they ask for pain medication, that, women, when you talk about young women, even, doctors are more likely to prescribe young men a plan for, if the issue is, weight loss, they will prescribe a plan for a young boy. Whereas, like, with a young girl, it'll just be like, well, you need to lose weight, and kind of just like leave them to themselves, right? To deal with that. And so it's just, you start to say, well, that means when you go in tomorrow, you say, I know about this data. I know people have said this story to me. I'm not sure if this is what's happening, but this is what I feel is happening. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of times I didn't want the book either to just, kind of vilify healthcare providers. I wanted it to sort of serve as that check where someone could just say, maybe you're not aware of this, right? I mean, I do talk about a survey from 2016, not way back in the day, 2016, that showed a large number of white residents who thought that Black people's skin was more impervious to pain, right? This is 2016, right? And so I think a lot of that, it takes so long for you to be a doctor, and you have to be very smart and hardworking and have a work ethic and, have a commitment to helping people. And so I think a lot of times people just sort of need that wake up call. One of the women I interviewed, her name is Maima Kamo, and she's the founder of Tiger Lily Foundation. And she just said, you've got to be your own badass. I'm sorry. I hope this is, I hope this is PG-13.
We put the thing, it's not for children, on there, so it's okay. No, but I love that line, right? Like, I think it's so true. And when you talk about advocacy and you talk about next steps, I would love to highlight that a little bit and go through some of the steps. And I don't want to spoil everything, because I do want people to buy the book and read the book, because they need to. But I really want to ask about those smaller steps that we can take. One person is not going to be able to break through and just destroy and rebuild the systemic change that we need. So what are things that individuals can do on that basis? And I'd like to say too, how can we do it for others? You know what I mean? Like I think about moms and their children and being advocates for them, and or spouses being advocates. You know, what are some things that we can do not only for ourselves but for each other?
That's a great question. So a couple of things that I say. One, check in with your community, because more than likely other people have experienced that before. In fact, one of the people I talked to, when I told them, what ended up being wrong with me, they were like, well, do you have Black family members that you could have talked to who would have told you this is probably what it is? That's really important, right? Is I talk about checking with your community. I talk about researching your doctor. One of the positive stories is someone kind of getting their doctor through personal recommendations of people in their circle who could say this doctor is someone that I trust. Um, Another thing I say is do your research. Unfortunately, you do, like what happened to me. I had to Google my symptoms. I had to look and see how prevalent this was before going in and saying, this is what's probably wrong with me. I think a lot of times we believe, like, they're the almighty doctor, and we kind of are in this space where we want to trust them and we want to like take everything that they're saying. And in a lot of cases that may be true, but sometimes maybe there's a blind spot. Maybe they haven't worked with someone of color before. Maybe they haven't thought about that. And so sometimes I think it's important to do your own research and to go in and say, is it possible that it's this? Is it possible that it's this? Also, one of the stories that I talk about, someone who was suffering from an autoimmune disease that was hard to identify, is find a doctor that's willing to be your team, like be a team member with you, be, a partner with you in finding out what's wrong with you, and not thinking that if I can't find out what's wrong immediately, that's that, right? I also talk about the importance of, like I said, not letting yourself be dismissed. And I know how hard that is, especially, when you live. One of the reasons that I read the story that I read is because I thought it was just important during Black History Month to talk about this special place or this unique space that Black women occupy in our society. Um, but I think that it's important sometimes to say, I recognize that this is a thing that happens to people who look like me a lot. And that is why I can't accept what you're telling me right now. So I really do need you to at least check or, double check or at least believe me and trust me that these are the things that I'm feeling. Right. And so those are a couple of things. I think doing your research, relying on your community, a doctor that you can trust, building a rapport with your doctor. Another aspect of the positive stories is, when I talk about Mayuma, she said to one of the doctors that she felt was being really dismissive, she was like, listen, you're my doctor. You work for me. You have to pay attention to me. You can't treat me like I don't matter. And I'm paraphrasing because it's not in front of me, but I think that that's really important, to find that power to say that, to say, I'm not going to stop speaking because you're dismissing me. And I think it's important to say that, because even after I wrote the book, the story of Dr. Susan Moore just happened over the holidays, who was a doctor who did say everything was wrong with her, what she thought was wrong with her. And she still was subjected to dismissive treatment or wasn't believed until they were able to take a CT scan. She goes to another hospital, gets more compassionate care, but she still dies from what her family believed, at least, was COVID-19 related complications. And they went back to the original hospital where she was at. The spokesperson said, well, she may have intimidated staff. And you start thinking about that stereotypical trope of like the things like not even just healthcare providers, but people will say to you, like in society, you're crazy, you're angry, you're
Bossy, bitchy.
you're
Yeah.
bossy, you're bitchy, and as if like now the onus is on you to be kind to people who are supposed to be taking care of you, right? And if we're only putting that burden on some people who look a certain way and not on others, I think that's a problem.
It is a problem. And you do a really good job too of addressing it. And also there's still too something that you mentioned, that it's not vilifying the healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
And you really do talk to physicians and talk to some really great ones. And you know, as for as many stories, as harrowing stories there are good ones out there that are trying to change this, that are taking the classes and being the professionals who are wanting to change it from the inside out. So I love that you were able to find that duality in it too. I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions, because I feel like you and I could just talk all day. But one thing I will ask is, I'd be interested to know what you want to do next with this knowledge. Is it writing another book? Is it changing your law practice? Is it speaking engagements? What's next with what you've learned here?
So I have a couple of great opportunities that have come out, due to the book, this being one of them. I'm also speaking at a conference about community health and migrant workers, and the importance of federally qualified health centers in March. And I'll be happy to share that information with you afterwards. I want to create a community of change makers. I think that I've long believed, now I did practice law. I'm still licensed to practice law, but I do policy now. And one of the things that I believe is that the communities that are most impacted can always tell you what they need, right? Because communities are resilient, and they're not in the position that they're in sometimes because of their own actions. It's usually because of bad policies or, historic disinvestment or being neglected. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to continue to use storytelling as this tool to continue to reveal the issues, but then also let's start talking to women who are making changes. Yes, only 5% of active physicians are Black, and only 2% of those are Black women, right? And so that's a problem, because studies definitely show that the outcomes are better when you're being taken care of by someone who looks like you. So how do you do that if only 2% of people are that? And that's something that becomes clear when you talk to both Dr. Vanessa Archill, who's in the book, and when you talk to Dr. Crystal Clark. They're both sort of feeling that when Black people come to them, they're just like, I'm so happy it's you, right? There's just like, it's like,
But it makes
like,
sense.
all I did was walk in the room and I've already become like the hero. So I do want to create this community of change makers, whether it's, I read a story today that there's been an uptick in Black applicants to medical school post-COVID, right? And to me, that's great. Like, let's have a pipeline of healthcare workers who understand these systemic issues and have been impacted by, this dismissive treatment and this neglect. But then at the same time, let's have those people who have been neglected and impacted now go into healthcare facilities and say, this is how I felt after you said this. This is how I'm being impacted by your treatment. These are the decisions I'm making. When you look at the disparities based on race, it's not based on socioeconomic status or education or anything like that, right? Like, you can only ascribe it to race in a lot of ways, but I think that it's important for people to start hearing those stories. Somebody that I interviewed for the book just had another baby, and she called me and she was like, the experience was night and day, because she had talked to me. She had, read like advanced copies of the book and seen that other people had similar stories. So when she came in, her partner was on top of it. He was like, I know this issue, and I know this is an issue, and that we went through this before, and we're not doing this again. And so everybody was kind of like, they went in immediately saying like, we won't have it, right? And so the healthcare provider, where they went, changed the way that they treated them. And that is what I want. I want more people to feel empowered. I want people to know that they're not alone. And I want people to then feel comfortable speaking up, especially when they're being dismissed.
Absolutely. And being able to share these stories, like you said, is really changed this through story, because that's one of the first steps too, isn't it? Is finding out that you're not alone. That like, and that's what started this for you too, right? Was like finding out that you weren't alone. And so wanting to try and grow that community to impact that change. And I think that's wonderful. And you do a great job with it in the book. And I'm very excited to see if you write another one. And how that might change, how that might help.
Thinking of another one. I don't have a publisher, so this one I want to focus on positive stories on the continent of Africa, and talking about what we can learn from community-led solutions.
Awesome.
And we kind of bridge the two. So
I love that. That's cool. Yes. Okay. You'll come back for that one. Anyway.
I'll be here.
So it is time for viewer questions. We want to take Q&A for the next couple of minutes or so. And there's a chat next to you guys that you can write in, not you, sorry, Umi, I was talking to them. But there's a chat next to the video you're watching us on, and I can recite the questions for you guys. Here's a really good one to start with, which is, what advice do you give for children being advocates for themselves and their health?
So I think that we teach children, and usually children who are considered different at a very early age, to kind of, not be their own advocate sometimes, like, especially for girls. I hate to be gender normative, but I think sometimes society, tells you, sort of dissuades you not to speak up and not to advocate for yourself. And then you have to fight that as you get older, right? So I would say that listen to them, right? If they feel uncomfortable, just like you would listen to your child if they felt uncomfortable with an adult, if they told you that something about that interaction with the adult made them uncomfortable, you should also listen to them when they go to the doctor and they say, I don't feel better. I'm not feeling any better. I'm still feeling pain. I don't understand. One thing I learned being a lawyer is someone told me very early on, like, imagine you're talking to your mother, right? Now, my mother is very smart. So I don't know if that helps all the time, but if I can explain it to my mom, if I can explain, because she's not a lawyer, but if I can explain it to her, then I can explain it to a jury. And I think that's the same thing. I think doctors need to be able to explain to children, especially, what's going on with them. And then you empower that. So I don't necessarily think that you need a different set of facts for kids than you do for adults. And I know we have more questions, but this is a very important part. Sexual health education is really important. A couple of people.
I didn't get to that part of my questions, but I was like, I want to focus on her entire section. I was like, gosh, can you just write a book on sexual health education?
Exactly. And I do that. I talk about it in two different areas when I talk to, two non-binary individuals. And I think what's important is for both of them, it was people didn't explain to them things about their body, because it was basically, you have a uterus, therefore that uterus is so you get, and so don't have sex, so then you won't get pregnant. And that is not enough for anyone, right? Because then years later, this person has a ruptured cyst, which apparently happens all the time, but they didn't even know that that was a thing. Like, they didn't even know that was a thing that happened. They just knew that they were in pain, right? Another person who is a trans person and also non-binary, they said that they were subjected to a pregnancy test, even though they were very clear that they did not need a pregnancy test. And this is a person that's in college, right? Like, you should be able to advocate and say and be trusted when you say things like that. So I do think that it's really important to start with the sexual health education, and not puritanical sort of like education that's deeply rooted in religion, but just actual sexual health education where people walk away with a knowledge of their body, right? I didn't talk about what was wrong with me because it seemed like I grew up in the South. I grew up in Houston. So it was not polite conversation for me. And so, but then that translates, right? Because when I'm going to my doctor, I'm like, so I'm feeling pain.
I have this thing and I'm not really
thing.
Yeah.
It happens once a month. Maybe you know of it. Like it was a secret. And I was like, no, I shouldn't be like about my health. I should be like, listen, my body's screaming in pain. It's not normal and I need a solution. And I think that starts young.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And like I said, we were going through it and I was like, oh, I needed to talk to her about this, but it happens. We only have a certain amount of time, unfortunately.
I know.
But, so here's another really great one. What advice do you have for first-time writers trying to write their own book? I think that's a fun one.
I love that one. So I did write an article about my experience with this class with my publisher. It's New Degree Press, and it's hybrid publishing. So it's a mix between self publishing and traditional publishing. But for me, it was I could have self-published, right? I could have done that. I could have gone that route. For me, though, I was still working a full-time job as I was writing this. The thing about writing in the middle of a pandemic is that there was nothing to do. I couldn't go outside, and so it just became like, writing became sort of my therapy. It was like the book was my weekly therapy or daily at some points therapy sessions. And so what I say to people is write about something that you love, write about something that you're passionate about, and find a situation with a publisher or with an agent that where a lot of that kind of you know I call it the sausage making isn't on you. Because I didn't have time for the sausage making. Like I didn't have time for the editing. I didn't have time for, the marketing aspect of things. I didn't have time for all of that. I just needed to be able to be in a space where I could write and get my stories out. Because for me, I had these 9 to 10 people who were trusting me with their personal stories, in a lot of ways, the worst thing that ever happened to them in their life, or, in another case, like the best thing that ever happened to them in their life. But I mean, I had to get it right. And I told everyone I was writing a book. So I was like, my mother already was like, do not embarrass me. Do not embarrass the family. I love you. You can do this. I believe in you, but don't embarrass us. And so,
Southern mother too. So I know that phrase.
Exactly. Like my dad is also, he wants to be a writer, and he's always like, well, at this point, whatever I write has to be Homer. And I'm like, so those are the expectations. I felt like I needed to be able to just be in a space where I could get it right. So I just say, if it's something that you're passionate about, if it's something that you feel like when you get up in the morning, like there would be times when I would be in the middle of a meeting and I would be like, that's a really great hook for this chapter, and I would be writing it down in between. And so I think that's when I knew like this is a story that was just the need to come out.
No, that's great, because you're spending a lot of hours with it. That's one of the best advice that you hear from writers, is that you really have to pick something that you love and you hate, because you're sitting, and like you said, you're in the pandemic, so you can't go anywhere. If this is the thing you want to do, really commit to it. So that's awesome. That's perfect advice. So like I said, I've been enjoying this conversation immensely. And so I hate the idea of it ending, but I do want to end on this question, which is one of my favorite to ask authors, is what did this book teach you? Either about yourself, a tidbit of information that you haven't gotten to share with us yet, something that changed in you when you wrote this book. What did this book teach you?
What this book taught me was actually that I am my own best advocate. And I feel like it's a weird thing to say when you're an attorney and you go to school to be an advocate. But I think a lot of times as I tell friends, it was very hard for me to take a side, right? I can take a side when I am, either on the defense or as a prosecutor, because I have the facts in front of me, I have the law in front of me, and then there's not that necessarily connection. And I don't have to get emotional, and it's just about, this story that, doesn't affect me. And this was the time that I took something that was so personal and put it on a page, right? I've always sort of compartmentalized my life where, okay, this is my LinkedIn life, this is my Facebook life, this is my Instagram life, this is my Twitter life. And so this was very scary, because it was very much all parts being, out there for the specific purpose of, if I don't tell this story, if people don't realize that this thing happened to me as a person with 2 degrees, as this person who's an attorney, if people don't realize that this can still happen to me, then I don't think that they will also feel like they're not alone, right? And I also didn't want people to think that oh, what was wrong with me that I didn't speak up? You know, one of the women I talked to in the story who had this horrible birthing, you know, experience to have her beautiful, beautiful son, you know, at the end of it was just like, you know, she's an attorney too, and was having trouble kind of articulating why she didn't push back as much. And I think it's important for people to know that even folks who are advocates for other people have trouble in the moment being advocates for themselves. And so that's what this book told me, it taught me. And speaking of, you know, writing books, I tell all my friends, I don't have kids, but I tell all my friends that do have kids, I'm like, it's like having a baby. It's the same, it's the same as, and all of my friends get very offended because I'm like, it was a labor of love. And at the end of it, I have this beautiful baby that, like, you know, is perfect to me. And so I will say that I learned that I am my own best advocate.
That's awesome. And also, you are allowed to be proud of your creation, crying baby or no. And I feel like you got the better idea out of it, better deal out of it, less poopy diapers and less crying. Probably less expensive in the long run too.
Exactly.
But I'm sorry, I had to make those jokes. But I want to say thank you, because your honesty, your sincerity, your storytelling has been great, not only tonight, but in the book. And it's just, it shows that you're a real reflection of what you've written. And I really hope nothing but good things for you in this book and the next one, and hopefully the next one after that, you know? And so thank you for talking with us tonight. Not all interviews are as honest and sincere, so I appreciate that. And I'm sure that our viewers appreciate it too. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is just amazing. I tell everyone, I was so excited. I think I like found out at like 11:15 at night, and I was like, I'm posting. I don't care if the best time is 8 a.m. on a whatever random Tuesday. I was like, today, this Saturday, it's going up.
It's happening. No, that's great. And well, I want to encourage everybody. You need to get EmpowHERed Health at tatteredcover.com. Get your copy. It's worth the read. It will educate you. It will hurt your heart and help your heart, I think. That's one of the best ways to say it. And so get your copies today. Yumi, I want to give you a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and any other last minute thoughts that you have for us this evening before we close out.
Thank you so much. My name is Mayumi Yumi Grigsby. I am on Instagram at EmpowHERed Health. I'm also on Twitter, Grigsby Yumi. And you can find EmpowHERed at Tattered Cover bookstore. And I really hope that you grab a copy and that you feel empowered.
Absolutely. That's the best message to end on. My name is McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore. Once again, I want to remind you guys that you can get your copy today at tatteredcover.com or at any of our other 4 locations. We have our 5th location opening up this summer, so it'll be available there too. Thank you guys again for shopping locally. For a lot of you right now, it's dinner time out there, so maybe think about supporting a local business, mom and pop restaurant or something like that. They sure could use it. They're the reason that they're still here. That you are the reason that they're still here during these trying times. So thank you guys again. Umi, if you'll stick around while I close this out here. Once again, thank you again from Tattered Cover Bookstore. Get your copy of EmpowHERed Health today, and stay safe, everybody, and happy reading. Bye, all. And we're out.